Just imagine you're walking through the dense forest. The air is thick with the scent of pine and dirt, and you're thinking you're just another wanderer. Suddenly, you hear a rustle in the bushes, and before you can blink, a group of Native American warriors materialize from the shadows. These are no ordinary fighters. They've been tracking you for days, maybe even longer. And the worst part? They've already planned your fate. Each tribe had its own brutal style of warfare. Apache, Iroquois, Cherokee. All with their own set of rules, tactics, and a seriously twisted sense of strategy. So you better get on your knees and pray to any freaking god you serve, because when we get to the end of this video, you'll realize why you'd never want to be an enemy to Native American clans. Now you're caught up in their world where survival isn't just about winning the fight, but about teaching you a lesson you'll never forget. These warriors didn't fight just for land or power. They fought for something much deeper. Vengeance, honor, and a sacred duty to protect their people. You thought you knew war? Well, you haven't seen anything yet. The Apache, known for their guerrilla tactics, were practically ghost-like, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The Iroquois? They took psychological warfare to a whole new level, using stealth, cunning, and ambush tactics that would make any modern-day strategist blush. They didn't need fancy technology. They had patience, craftiness, and a deep understanding of how to mess with your head. But here's the very interesting thing. These tribes weren't just interested in a fair fight. Oh no. They didn't do fair. This was about sending a message. Your death wasn't going to be quick or clean. It was going to be calculated, horrific, and unforgettable. You weren't just an enemy to defeat, you were an example to the rest of the world, warning them not to mess with the wrong people. And now, with every step you take, you're inching closer to your worst nightmare. And there's no way out. Before you even think about picking up a weapon, you need to understand the rules of the game. Because in Native American warfare, there were definitely rules. And believe me, they weren't your typical fight until the last man standing kind of rules. These warriors didn't just go into battle for land or riches. They fought for something far more personal. It was about protecting their families, defending their honor, and preserving the spirits of their ancestors. These were battles not just of physical strength, but of deep-rooted tradition and spirit. Here's where things get really tricky for you. The Native American warriors had an almost supernatural ability to track their enemies. They would follow you for days, leaving no trace behind, while you blissfully walked around, unaware that death was quietly following in your footsteps. Imagine yourself walking through the woods, your senses on high alert, but every shadow and rustling leaf might be the last thing you hear before everything goes dark. They didn't need high-tech gadgets or fancy gear, just a deep connection with the land and an unshakable sense of patience. Ambushes were their specialty. They were the masters of hiding in plain sight, waiting in the silence until they struck with precision. And let's talk about the psychological warfare. Oh, it was as brutal as the physical. You weren't just an enemy to them, you were a message. The longer you fought, the more it became clear that this wasn't just about survival. It was about making you wish you'd never stepped foot in their territory. Fear wasn't just a tool, it was an art form. The longer they could keep you on edge, the more they could break you down before you even saw the fight coming. You didn't just lose in battle, you lost your mind, your spirit, and your dignity. And that was the real victory. If, for instance, you disrespect one of them, you didn't just disrespect a warrior in their world, you disrespected everything they stood for. And that was paid for in blood. In the world of Native American warfare, spies were seen as the worst of the worst. Worse than the enemy, worse than the most brutal warrior. A spy wasn't just someone who gathered information, they were considered a traitor to the very essence of tribal life. They weren't just captured and interrogated, they were made to suffer, and suffer terribly. When a spy was caught, there was no mercy. This wasn't about a quick death. No, it was about sending a message so clear and terrifying that no one in their right mind would ever dare betray a tribe again. You think being caught was bad enough? Let's get into the brutal details. The tribes didn't simply kill spies. They made an example of them. This often involved torture, and not the kind of slow, let's make you talk sort of torture. This was the real deal. First, they'd extract information from the spy using methods designed to break the spirit and the body. Sometimes the interrogation would involve fire, literally. Imagine being held down, your skin searing, the pain unbearable as the tribesmen tried to force you to spill everything you knew. But even if the spy gave up every detail, the punishment didn't stop there. Once the info was out, the worst part came: public execution. Oh, and it wasn't just a clean execution. No. It was brutal and gruesome. Scalpings, mutilations, the kind of death that made everyone watching think twice before crossing the line. Imagine a crowd gathered around, eyes wide, the air thick with tension as a betrayal was repaid in the most horrific way possible. A spy's fate wasn't just to die, it was to die with pain, humiliation, and the promise of being remembered most dreadfully. Scalpings, for example, were not just for trophies. They were about stripping away your very identity, your dignity, and leaving your legacy in tatters. So, yeah, if you were ever caught spying, death wasn't even the worst of it. It was the utter, relentless horror that awaited you. Scalpings. When most people hear that word, they probably picture some wild, bloody scene from a Hollywood Western. But the reality, well, it's even darker than the movies let on. Scalpings weren't just some mindless act of violence. They were a deeply personal and horrifyingly deliberate practice tied to revenge, honor, and power. It wasn't just about taking a trophy home. Oh no, it was about sending a clear message to everyone within earshot. Mess with the wrong tribe and you'll end up bald, in the worst way possible. The roots of scalping go way beyond just wanting to show off. In Native American tribes, scalping had a sacred purpose. It was revenge in its purest, most brutal form. If an enemy killed one of their people, it wasn't just about getting even, it was about restoring balance. The scalp was a symbol of victory, a tangible piece of humiliation. And let's be real. The worst part of it wasn't even the death. It was the sheer terror of knowing that if you messed up, you could lose your head in more ways than one. Tribal warriors weren't just ripping off a scalp for the sake of violence. They were making a statement. After a successful battle, the scalps of fallen enemies would be proudly displayed as a badge of strength. And if you think it was all about strength, think again. There was a psychological element too. Imagine seeing your fallen comrades paraded with nothing but a bloody mess where their hair used to be. That's terror right there. Fear was the real victory in these rituals, knowing that every time you went to battle, your enemies weren't just facing death. They were facing a fate worse than dying, a life of humiliating, soul-crushing defeat. So next time you think of scalping, don't just think about a wild image from a movie. Think about the terror it invoked. Because one wrong move could mean you end up with nothing but a bloody, bald head. And that's something you never forget. The Native American tribes had an arsenal of painful methods designed to break their enemies physically and mentally. Take burning, for example. This wasn't just a quick flash of flame. It was about using hot stones or fire to slowly roast an enemy's skin. Imagine being held down while the searing heat of stone pressed against your flesh. The pain was unbearable, but even worse, it was drawn out. Torturers would make sure the enemy was aware of their impending doom as they slowly cooked, with no escape in sight. But the fire wasn't the only tool. Sticks and ropes were used in slow, agonizing rituals that would make even the toughest warrior beg for mercy. Victims could be tied up, stretched, and whipped until their skin was raw. And it wasn't just about pain, it was about humiliation. The enemy was made to realize that their defeat was inevitable, that they were completely at the mercy of their captors. Every second they endured was another reminder of their powerlessness. This wasn't just for revenge, it was a way to show the rest of the tribe and their enemies what happened to those who dared cross them. It wasn't enough to kill you. They had to break your spirit first and make sure that anyone who heard the story would understand that defeat meant much more than death. It meant utter humiliation and eternal shame. And the worst part? This was just the beginning. Ambushes. To Native American tribes, this wasn't just a tactic, it was their bread and butter. They didn't need a grand battlefield or elaborate armor to win. Nope, all they needed was patience, cunning, and the deep understanding of the land they were fighting on. Now, imagine you're marching through a thick forest, feeling the soft crunch of leaves beneath your boots, thinking you're just going about your business. It's peaceful. Too peaceful. Then suddenly the ground beneath you shifts, and before you can blink, you're surrounded. It's not just a fight, it's a nightmare you never saw coming. The real magic behind these ambushes was the environment. The Native American warriors knew their territory like the back of their hand. Every tree, every rock, every shadow was part of their playbook. They didn't need to fight fair. Fair wasn't even in their vocabulary. They knew that by using the land to their advantage, they could turn the odds completely in their favor. They'd wait for the right moment, blending seamlessly with nature, silent as shadows, only to strike when their prey was completely unprepared. And when they did, it was fast, brutal, and effective. It wasn't about making noise or charging in with all guns blazing. It was about deceiving the enemy, getting them to drop their guard, and then unleashing a devastating surprise. These warriors knew that every step could be their last, so they made sure their enemies were the ones taking that fatal step. The ground was their weapon, and they were the ultimate masters of it. You'd think you were safe, just strolling along, but in the blink of an eye, you'd realize that in their world, you never were. Ambushes weren't just a strategy, they were a game of life or death, and you had no idea you were playing until it was too late. Now let's talk about revenge. For Native American tribes, it wasn't just a passing thought, it was the driving force behind much of their actions. When a loved one was killed, it wasn't just about mourning the loss. It was about hunting down the person responsible and making them pay in the most personal way possible. There was no room for justice as we know it. This wasn't about forgiveness, it was about retribution. Imagine this. Your family member is gone, and it's up to you to right the wrong, even if it means tracking your enemy for years. It wasn't a matter of getting over it. It was about making sure the enemy felt the same pain you did, and more. This wasn't just a revenge fantasy, it was a way of life. A blood debt was something you couldn't just let go of. Every battle, every conflict could be rooted in a family feud, a personal score, or an ancient grudge. And the worst part? There was no statute of limitations. If someone wronged your tribe, they might never see it coming, but rest assured, your tribe would make sure they paid. This was vengeance on a level you can't even begin to imagine. Some tribes would spend years hunting down the person who wronged them, and it didn't matter how far you'd run or how well you hid. There was no escaping the relentless pursuit of revenge. There were no peace treaties, no forgiveness, no let's just move on. The concept of letting go didn't exist. You wronged a Native American tribe, and sooner or later, you'd pay the price. It wasn't just a matter of getting back at someone, it was about protecting the honor of the tribe. A warrior's duty wasn't just to fight, it was to ensure the tribe's reputation stood strong, even if it meant a never-ending cycle of vengeance. The question wasn't whether you'd get revenge, it was simply how long would it take? And trust me, it would happen. Sooner or later, fighting Native American warriors wasn't just about testing your physical strength, it was about tearing at your spirit, slowly breaking you down until you didn't know which way was up. Sure, they were skilled fighters, but the real horror came from what they did to your mind long before you ever saw their blade. This wasn't just a battle for land or glory, it was psychological torture, and it started the moment you stepped into their territory. Imagine the fear that gripped you when you realized you were being hunted, but you had no idea where the hunters were. Constant anxiety gnawed at you. Every crack of a branch, every rustle in the leaves could be the moment you were surrounded, and you'd never even see it coming. Native American warriors didn't need to rush in and overwhelm you. No, they were experts at patience. They tore at your nerves, making you second-guess every shadow, every noise. It wasn't just physical, the stealth and deception were what truly tormented you. They could be 20 feet away, watching your every move, and you wouldn't have a clue. And just when you thought you were safe, they'd strike. It was like being in a nightmare where there was no escape. You were always one step behind, your enemies always one step ahead. You didn't know when or where the next attack would come, and the mental strain would break you down long before you saw the tip of the spear. But it wasn't just about hiding in the trees and waiting to attack. Native American warriors often used rituals and eerie practices to get inside your head. They'd use strange noises, bizarre chants, or even appear in the dead of night with eerie war paint, making you question if you were facing human enemies at all. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight to keep your sanity intact, and many didn't make it. It wasn't the blade that killed them, it was the relentless fear of never knowing when or where the next attack would come. Losing to a Native American tribe wasn't just about dying, it was about a legacy of terror that would haunt you long after you breathed your last breath. For those who lost in battle, death wasn't always the first thing they had to face. Oh no, the real horror was in what came after they were captured. In many cases, the defeat wasn't the worst part, it was what came next. Being taken alive meant your body was no longer just a vessel for your soul. It was a tool, a slave to your captor's whims. For some, they were turned into slaves, forced to work as laborers for the very people they once fought against. Imagine being dragged from your battle, your pride shattered, and put to work doing tasks that left you no dignity. You weren't even allowed to die in peace. You were a tool for the tribe's needs. And if you thought that was bad, some enemies weren't just made to work. They were sacrificed in brutal ceremonies. These weren't the kind of ceremonies where you just peacefully passed on. No, you were made to suffer in ways most people can't even imagine, all while your captors watched as your spirit was broken. The sacrifice wasn't just about killing, it was about sending a message to everyone else. You lost, you're dead, and your suffering was just a way to show the world how far they would go to get revenge. But not everyone got the sweet release of death quickly. Some were kept alive just long enough for their enemies to rub their power in their face. They were forced to see the full extent of what the tribe could do, the horrors they were capable of, and the complete humiliation of it all. The mind games weren't just about breaking your body, they were about breaking your spirit. And for many, death was a sweet release, because facing the endless torment that came after defeat, that was the real hell. At the end of the day, when you look back at everything Native American tribes did in war, it's impossible to ignore the sheer horror of their tactics. But it's equally important to remember that these weren't just acts of mindless violence. The brutal methods, the ambushes, the psychological torture, the scalpings, they weren't born from hatred or cruelty alone. They were deeply tied to something more fundamental: the survival of the tribe. The protection of family and the preservation of culture and land. Native American warfare wasn't just about taking land from an enemy or proving superiority. It was about making sure that the way of life they held sacred wasn't destroyed. This wasn't a game to them. Every battle had deeper meaning. It was about defending everything that mattered. Yes, the ambushes, where the enemy never saw it coming, were terrifying. The psychological warfare, where you were pushed to the brink of madness just from waiting for the next strike, was soul-crushing. But these tactics weren't just designed to terrorize, they were designed to protect. They fought for their families and their culture to ensure that their legacy lived on. And let's not forget the revenge. While it may seem horrific, revenge was often a way to balance the scales, to make sure that the bloodshed didn't go unanswered. It wasn't about being cruel. It was about making sure their people never forgot that betrayal or violence had consequences. So what can we learn from all this? In a harsh, unforgiving world, when your survival, your family, and your land are at risk, how far would you be willing to go to protect them? Would you fight with the same fury? Would you endure the same sacrifices? Think about it. Would you fight with everything you've got, just like the Native American tribes did? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and share if you want to see more brutal Native American truths from history.